The forest kingdom breathes in silence. Welcome to Fantasy Journeys. The forest begins with sound, not birdsong, though birds are here, somewhere high in the canopy, invisible and intermittent. But the sound of water, it arrives before the light changes, before the trees thicken into something older and more deliberate. It comes through the ground first, through the horse's hooves, as a faint trembling in earth that has been wet for a very long time. The air changes next, cooler by several degrees than the road behind them, and carrying something mineral and green, the smell of stone that has not seen direct sun in centuries, of moss compressed gently by nothing heavier than rain. It fills the lungs differently than open country air. It slows the body before the mind has decided to slow. The trees here are not larger than other trees. That is the first unexpected thing. They are simply more certain of themselves, rooted with the patience of things that have stopped competing for the light and learned instead to live inside it. Lira reaches for the map without looking, her right hand finding the strap of the leather tube by habit, thumb working the brass clasp. She does not take the map out yet. She just rests her hand there, the way a person rests a hand on the shoulder of someone they have been looking for. Ahead, the path narrows until it looks less like a path and more like a suggestion, the kind of opening that does not ask you to enter so much as it simply does not stop you. The water is somewhere below, or it was always there, and only now is the world quiet enough to hear it properly. Something inside this forest has been breathing for a long time, waiting, with the particular patience of something that has never doubted it would eventually be found. Chapter 1. The Map, with no author. The map had been right about the oak tree. Lira had not expected it to be right about the oak tree. The map was 300 years old, drawn in brown ink on paper that had softened to the texture of skin, and marked in a script so small she needed the brass magnifying lens clipped to her journal's cover to read it properly. Maps that old were wrong about everything. Rivers that had since changed course, roads that had become fields, forests that had become towns. They were useful for showing intent, not reality. She had told Cael this when they left the last village 4 days ago. She had told herself this every morning since, and yet the oak tree was exactly where the map said it would be. Bifurcated at the base into 2 equal trunks, each the circumference of a cartwheel, growing at the precise angle the map's tiny ink lines suggested. The road bent around its roots in a curve too specific to be coincidence. When Lira had held the map up beside the tree and compared them, Cael had watched her face instead of the map. "Same tree," she had said. "Same tree," he had agreed, and said nothing else, which was how Cael usually handled things that didn't fit neatly into the categories he already owned. That was 3 hours ago. Since then, the road had thinned, first to a lane, then to a track, then to 2 parallel lines of compressed earth that the horses seemed to find by instinct rather than sight. The trees on either side were closing their canopy overhead with the slow certainty of a tide coming in. Lira's horse, a grey mare named Fen, who had opinions about mud and no opinions at all about anything else, picked her footing carefully and without complaint. She was a good horse for uncertain ground. Lira rolled the map out across her saddle bow for the 4th time since noon. The paper was cool under her fingertips, slightly waxy where someone had treated it against moisture. Beeswax or a similar compound, she thought. Though 3 centuries old, it had held. The forest on the map was rendered in careful cross-hatching, each line at a different pressure, so that the density of the marks communicated something about the density of the trees. Not all cartographers did that. Most drew forest as a simplified symbol, a repeated shape. Whoever had made this map had been somewhere else, somewhere more particular, in their understanding of how a forest felt to move through. She ran her thumb along the edge of the paper where a cartographer's signature would normally appear. Nothing. No initials, no guild mark, no date in the corner, only a small symbol pressed into the lower right margin. A single leaf, its veins drawn with more care than anything else on the entire map. 5 fine lines radiating from a central stem. The ink there was slightly darker, as if the pen had paused above it longer than it paused anywhere else. She had noticed it the first night, under lantern light at the estate archive, where the map was catalogued simply as Interior Survey, Provenance Unknown, circa 1680s. She had assumed the leaf was decorative. Cartographers use such things. Compass roses, heraldic animals, small flourishes at the edges of their work. But there was no compass rose on this map. No flourishes anywhere. Only the leaf, exact and purposeful, in a document otherwise stripped of ornament. Ahead, Cael pulled his horse to a stop on the track. He did not speak. He rarely announced a stop. He simply became still in a particular way, the way a person became still when they were listening rather than waiting. His horse, a bay with a broad chest and a name Lira had never learned, because Cael seemed not to have given him one, stopped with equal economy of movement. Lira drew alongside him. The track had widened slightly here, where 2 large beeches grew close together and their root systems had pushed the earth up on either side into shallow ridges. Between the ridges, the ground was soft and very dark. She could smell it, a deep mineral dampness, the kind that came from soil that had not fully dried in a long time. Decades, perhaps longer. The air changed, Cael said. He said it the way he said most things, without inflection, like someone reading coordinates aloud. 2 minutes ago, Lira said, when we passed that fallen trunk. He looked at her. She had learned to read what was in that look. Not surprise exactly, but a kind of attention, the particular focus he gave to things that interested him without yet knowing why they interested him. Same time for me, he said. She looked back at the map. The fallen trunk was on it. Not as a landmark, not labelled, but it was there, a horizontal mark across 2 of the cross-hatching lines, as if the cartographer had noted it in passing. The way you noted something that was simply present without needing to explain its presence. If the trunk had fallen before the map was made, it would be 300 years old. Trees fell and softened into earth quickly in wet forest. She could not explain why the mark was still there. She could not explain why the map was still right. The track bent to the left ahead, following what the map showed as a gradual curve around a low ridge. Beyond the bend, the map's cross-hatching deepened into something almost black at its center, the indication she had assumed of old-growth forest. Denser, darker overhead. In the margin beside that section, in the same minute hand that labeled the oak tree and the fallen trunk and the two beeches, was a phrase she had been puzzling over since the archive. The first sound. Not river, not stream, not any topographic term she recognized. Just that. The first sound. As if the cartographer expected you to know what they meant. Or as if they assumed that when you arrived here, the thing would announce itself without needing a name. Lira folded the map along its existing creases. She never made new ones, and tucked it back into the leather tube, clicking the brass clasp. The tube smelled of beeswax. It always smelled of beeswax. She had carried it long enough that she no longer noticed, unless something made her notice, the way you didn't notice the weight of your own coat until you were too warm and someone opened a window. "The map says we're close," she said. Cael nodded once and let his horse move forward. Fen followed without being asked. The bend in the track turned out to be longer than it looked, the kind of curve that kept revealing more of itself as you moved through it, always seeming about to straighten without ever quite doing so. On either side, the beeches gave way to older trees. She couldn't name them with certainty in this light. The canopy overhead had thickened enough that the sky was no longer visible, only the soft diffusion of late afternoon brightness filtered down through layer after layer of leaf and branch, until by the time it reached them, it was the color of pale water. Her coat felt warm. Lira unclipped the top button. The cold came up from below rather than down from above. Ground cold, the kind generated by earth that held moisture deep. She could feel it through the leather of her boots, through Fen's movement under her. Not unpleasant. More like stepping into a stone room after a warm day. Immediate and specific, and very old. Then she heard it. Not suddenly. That was the thing. It did not arrive suddenly. It simply became audible, the way a sound did when you had been hearing it at the edge of awareness for several minutes, and then some inner threshold shifted, and it crossed over into consciousness. Water. But not one water. 3, at different distances and different depths of pitch, running somewhere below and beyond the track, layered over each other in a cord that the forest had been holding the whole time without her noticing. Fen's ears moved forward. Cael had gone still again. Lira did not reach for the map. She did not need to. She knew with the particular certainty that came from months of learning how this cartographer thought, or had thought 300 years ago, that this was what the notation meant. Not a directional marker, not an instruction, simply a description, exact and unadorned, the way everything on this map was exact and unadorned. The first sound. 3 layers of water, each distinct, each continuous, running through a forest so old that its silence had learned to carry sound better than open air. She sat with it for a moment. Fen was patient. The bay stood without moving his feet, only his tail in slow motion against something Lira could not see. The leaf in the corner of the map. No signature, no guild, no name. Someone had made this map from somewhere they knew extremely well, not the way a surveyor knew a place. Measurement and calibration, the outside made legible, the way a person knew a room they had slept in for 20 years, where the cold air came from, which floorboards spoke, what the window looked like at the exact hour when the light was right. She had spent months assuming this was a document of discovery, a cartographer venturing in, mapping what they found, returning to the world with evidence of what existed. She was no longer sure that was what it was. The sound of water continued, unhurried and layered, and entirely indifferent to whether she understood it or not. "Do you hear that?" Cael asked, though they both knew he did not need her to confirm it. "3 separate sources," Lira said, "or one source over 3 levels." He considered this. "Which does the map say?" She almost told him she hadn't checked. Then she thought about it more carefully. The cross-hatching, the way the lines moved, the careful distinction between marks that indicated still water and marks that indicated moving water. "I don't know yet," she said instead, which was closer to the truth. The track ahead continued into the deepening green. The trees were very still. The water was not. Somewhere below them, Elarwyn Vale was holding its breath, exactly as it had been holding it for 600 years, and the sound of 3 rivers running over ancient stone was the closest it came to speaking.